Hello.
Hello. How is it going?
Good.
Happy Tuesday.
Here too.
Yeah, I'm here too.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have Kenzie and Anissa already. Then I just see Liz and
And I don't know about others, but I can't start my video.
me
It's
either.
blocked by the host.
I just opened mine. Does that work now? Does it work now for you guys?
No. Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Still not for me. You're all there.
No, let me see again. I don't know if I have the power, but I'll check.
You have the power. We give you the power.
Kenzie, you good? You should be good. I'm trying.
No, it still says you can't start your video because the host has stopped it.
Here you go. Try again.
There we go. Yes, we're good. All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
Am I there?
Everyone?
Am I in? Can you see me?
Yeah, we can see you.
Can't see myself. There I go. Whew. How's it going?
Crazy. But
Yeah.
that's a good thing. It's going. So now I see you. Are you representing BPDA today? So now just
Hi.
hi.
Ryan's going to be coming in as well. We've got to vote.
You're Tim. Okay. I don't know. Is it Christine or Carrie? Did we figure out the screen sharing for today?
Hey, Counselor, it's Candace. What do you mean for the screen sharing for today?
Just want to make sure we can do that today in the middle of the working session, have some screen sharing for documents.
You can, yes.
Excellent. So do I just, PM you about what documents I would like to look at, or?
I can put them up for you. If you like, you can have them up as well. And do you see the share screen feature?
Let me see. I'm on my cell phone, so probably not. Where is it?
Counselor Edwards, when I did this, it was easier to have a staffer, like I don't know if Jesse or anybody's on, to throw them up.
Do we have to make them a co-host?
No, anybody can share their screen, I think, right now in the settings.
Okay.
Yes, anyone who's a panelist can share.
Yeah, they have to be out of attendees, but.
All right, let me text.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'm going to switch to the Spanish line just to test it, okay?
Okay. Well, I just texted Jesse, and if we get him. Okay, good. Jesse, can you hear me?
It looks like he's in attendees, so he needs to come over to panelists.
Yeah.
And then Brian Glasscock and Lizzie Torres, too.
Or in attendees?
Yeah. And John Greeley.
Okay, I'm in. So just let me know when I can share my screen.
Excellent. Okay, there are a lot of folks from the. Where Lizzie, you said is? There's Liz. There's Lizzie. Good. All right, there's a lot of folks here. I think Candace, everyone is in the waiting room. If you want to allow to come over, that's fine.
Do you want everyone in the waiting room to come over? I was sent a list of people and I moved those people over, but should everyone that's waiting be moved over?
Let me do the intro and then we can move them over. How about
Okay.
that?
Perfect.
All right. So it's 12:06, so let's just get started. I'm seeing I got from my colleagues. Sheila. All right. Hi everyone. Today is Friday, June. Sorry, my mindset. Today is Tuesday. Oh God, my head. And it's July. Oh, sorry, let me start again. Hi, I'm Counselor Edwards, and this is a working session on docket 0234, an order regarding a text amendment for zoning, Boston zoning code relative to affirmatively furthering for housing. I'm just going to cut right to it. This is our fourth conversation about this. So we are doing this on Zoom due to the Governor Baker's executive order modifying certain requirements of the open meeting laws. This will be the public may watch this meeting via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date on Comcast 8/RCN 82/Verizon 1964. For public testimony, written comments can be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made part of the record and available to all counselors. This is a working session, so we don't necessarily have a formal public comment period. And I will be directing where the comments are going to be about, and also moving us along so we can get to as much work as possible, because there's a lot to get done today. And I'm just going to go ahead and announce there will be another working session as we continue this conversation. But you know, making history isn't easy. It takes all hands. It takes a lot of conversations. It takes pushback and forward. And I think it's worth taking the time to do it right. With that, I wanted to note who I am joined here today by some of my honorable colleagues, Counselor Kenzie Bach, Counselor Anissa Sabi George, and Counselor Liz Braden. Have I missed anybody? Okay. Also joining us today from the administration, we have Sanal Gandhi, Tim Davis, and Sheila Dillon. I believe John Greeley, and Brian Glass-Cock is also here as well. That's from the BPDA and also from DND. So what I wanted to get to right away is what we're going to do today and what we're not going to do today, so that we are very clear about how we're going to approach this massive document and several of the documents you got. Today's goals are very, I would say, simple, and that is that we are going to present to you, the public, and those who will let in shortly, the consensus documents, consensus zoning amendment. This, by consensus, I mean myself, Counselor Bach, the BPDA, and DND sat down and kind of went through the zoning amendment, its body, and said, at a minimum, we agree to the following. That is what is presented to you as the progress update memo. We are going to go through that, but I want to be very clear. We are not approving or disapproving specific language. We are not looking at the commas. We're not looking at the, whether you like the phrasing. That is not for this working session. What I'm asking you to is pull back a little bit and look at the definitions. Do you see any term of art or any specific issue that should be defined? We're going to move on to the large and small project review and the areas of Article 80 that we're going to be looking to manipulate and change. Do you see are we missing something in Article 80? Is there a section that needs to be there or not? PDAs then follow with the same kind of analysis. We're asking really for the public to say, you missed this whole section or you missed this whole definition. And in this part of the conversation, it'll be mostly myself, Counselor Bach, and the BPD and DND listening to your reactions or thoughts about the consensus minimums. And we'll turn it over to my colleagues, and we'll turn it over to the public to kind of give that back and forth. I'm going to, you can also respond in writing after this, because this is a lot to take in, to say, I think actually you're missing this, Counselor, or I think you should include this, or I don't understand what this means. But right now, so if you come with a bunch of comments about how we've defined affirmatively furthering for housing, that language, we're not going to be going into any specific definitions or language right now. Okay? I hope that is clear. The bulk of this conversation will be about the implementation documents. There are 5 documents presented to you, and that's where the rubber meets the road. How we're assessing what developers are doing. We're going to look at the smart utilities document, which is an existing document, the accessibility document, which is also an existing document. We'll be looking at a new document on displacement assessment, where I think a lot of people are going to be very interested in how we make sure we have the right checklists. We'll be looking at also the, We'll be looking at a document that I've kind of pulled from Counselor Bach's memo she sent over, definitely doing the assessment of kind of a checklist for developers in terms of their ability to meet mitigation obligations, or at least to affirmatively further fair housing. I think I got them all. Did I get them all? Jesse, did I miss anyone? I don't think I did. Displacement mitigation. I think I got them. If I didn't, I apologize. But those were sent in it over to you as well to look at. 1, 2, accessibility. Okay. So that being said, we're going to go now into the larger document that is the consensus body so far of the amendment. And I am going to, before we go into that, I will turn over to my colleagues if they have any opening remarks and any thoughts in general about the goals and the amendment. So by order of arrival, I'll turn it over to Counselor Bach, then Counselor Asabi George, then Counselor Breeden.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. I know we have a lot to get through today, so I want to set the precedent of being brief and just saying I'm excited to be working on this. And definitely, as I've expressed before, I think looking at some of these implementation documents and scaffolding documents is key to this endeavor alongside the zoning amendment. So excited about the working session today. Thanks.
Thank you. So Asabi George.
Can I just say ditto? No, just happy to be here. Happy to get to it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Counselor Breeden.
Happy to be here. Keen to learn more and listen to all the comments today. Very excited about this process. Thank you.
So what we'll have Jesse do is if we can screen share the update on AFFH amendment, Jesse. Here we go. Excellent. So this is a setup for the memo, basically summarizing what is in the consensus zoning amendment. These are the minimums. We're going to have definitions for affirmatively furthering fair housing, analysis of impediments, displacement risk index, a displacement exclusion index, and small businesses. Then we're going to discuss Article 80 small, large project review and how affirmatively furthering fair housing has to be implemented throughout that review process in certain sections. And then we also add affirmatively furthering fair housing to the PDA master plans and development plans. That's the overall scaffolding. Now going to the amendment language. And at this point, folks who want to have comments, questions, or concerns, you can feel free to raise your hand, because this is for my colleagues and for the task force members. I want to thank you all for being here today to kind of go through. This is not a speak now or forever hold your peace moment either, for those who are reading this and realizing, oh my goodness, I'm not sure if this is we're telling you out of matter of transparency what we talked about. That's what good government does. We reflect what we talked about, what we thought made sense. We hope you will respond. You can do so now. You can do so now and later. You can do so just later. All right. So into the zoning amendment. Anybody have thoughts about not the definition language, but the terms of art or things that should be potentially part of the definition section? I understand you may have thoughts later, but I don't see any hands raised right now. We also left in, we just wanted you to see generally what we were doing. Keep going, scrolling down, Jesse. see where there were some parts where we told you where we did some of the redlining. This was to just break down for you why we did some things, or that we were, deeply involved in this. We took out exclusionary, didn't want a condition on displacement. We're just going to use displacement. You'll see with displacement risk index, we took out instead of areas because we didn't want it geographically limited to just putting in the word index. We did that for both historical and displacement risk index in terms of our analysis. And then we also included small businesses. This is because of the BPDA's concern and I think really great analysis or great thought that small businesses can be displaced and are a function, need to be somewhat protected or at least analyzed in the zoning. So we want to make sure we defined what is small business. We have not agreed on this definition. We just want to make sure that that is defined up front. Okay. Seeing no hands, colleagues, thoughts? Mostly that would be just you, Liz and Anissa. No? Okay. Then we go into a deeper dive into the sections of Article 80. This particular section on the cooperation agreement, we discussed this at length, and we wanted to make sure that the agreement did reflect that there are certain standards for affirmatively furthering fair housing. To the BPDA's credit, they noted that having it just there is too late in the process, and that what we're going to do ultimately is put a certain standard in the BPDA board memorandum that they have to comply with much earlier in the process. So this is not it's not sufficient, and it won't be consistent either. So that is to their credit. Then you'll see we took out some language before at the very bottom. That is because we thought that the BPDA language, or excuse me, the PDA language is more suited in the PDA section. It didn't, it's not deleted permanently. You will see then in Part C, this is the continuation of the lists and things that the BPDA already analyzes. In order to make sure that this was also part of that, we added in 9, 10, and 11. Again, these are checklists. And then in D, this is where we get into the large project review, and we're putting in this component, defining what 9 is, the checklist, and making it very efficient for what we'll be assessing. And if you'll just 1 second, Jesse, it's not in this zoning amendment, but all the other numbers have their own little paragraph defining of what's going to happen as well. So this is just being consistent with what they've done for other parts and other analyses throughout the BPDA. You can keep going down. Keep going down. So 10 and 11. This I thought was very, this was a suggestion from the BPDA. It makes complete sense. These are already parts of their analysis for accessibility, which is very important to know that that document that we're going to look at was defined and designed by folks in the disability community. They led on that. And the smart utilities is more of a function of several city government components that also led on that checklist. They both exist right now already, but what was really, I thought, a very good move was to make sure they're part of this analysis for this zoning amendment as well. Going further down to Part C. Just again, going through some of the assessments and components that need to be assessed for developers. What we're trying to do is provide, as I think Councilor Bach said earlier, enough hooks by referring to documents or referring to analysis to make sure that as the process goes through, the thoughts are consistently geared towards equity. And we have the guiding documents, which we will go through shortly, about how to gear their mindset towards equity. You continue down. This then goes into the PDA, master plans and development plans. This is where we put in affirmatively furthering for housing language into the PDA master plan and development overall. To make sure that was part of that analysis. There is some debate or conversation, I would say. I wouldn't call it debate so much, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Sanal, about how detailed we want this section to be versus whether we want a checklist or a supplementary document to have a lot of this language as a guiding post. Am I correct? Did I summarize that?
Yep, thank you.
Yeah. So, but we do overall want affirmatively for housing language in the PDA discussion. How detailed it gets, that's where we're still determining that. Going down, Jesse. Again, this section is implementing furthering for housing goals in the PDA analysis. And you'll see in sub I4, making sure that it's part of the authority review and approval affirmative for a PDA, which is, I think, very important for us. We've deleted the previous paragraph and put in a supplement one. We agreed that there should be an approval process depending on the AFFH standards. The language we are still in a discussion about. So if you go to the 2.4, in particular, the analysis around the public process, who will be holding that accountable and making sure it's truly accessible. We discussed, for example, the new diversity inclusion position could be a person or personnel that's dedicated to doing that. Also, we want to make sure that the approval is very clearly conditioned for PDA on meeting affirmatively furthering for housing goals. So if you'll keep going, Jesse, thank you. Again, that's what a lot of J does as well. It makes sure, again, that the approval is part of that. And I think if you'll, I'm sorry, if you go up a little bit, did we skip the amendment part? We're in the second section. No, this is the section. So this is J is particularly important. We wanted to make sure that anytime there's an amendment to the PDA, because PDAs can last for years, that this would that there would be a hook so that every time an amendment happens, there is an analysis under affirmatively furthering for housing. We wanted that to be very clear. And then I think that's it, right? Just if you go down, yeah. And then I removed an entire section on East Boston because we've agreed to remove, because we've agreed that there will be, and certain ongoing developments in East Boston will be subject to the amendment once it's implemented. So that's an outside conversation. It was the only neighborhood highlighted in this zoning amendment, so it made it an outlier. I think Councilor Bach and I talked about how having just one neighborhood put out there might not be the most efficient way of demonstrating it's for the entire city. But this was something very important to me as a district city councilor from East Boston, that Suffolk Downs, that's the development, meet these standards because it's 20 years of development. Councilor Braden, you raised your hand.
I'm curious about the PDA, in terms of if there's already existing PDAs, will there be, is this for new PDAs coming online or for existing PDAs? Because we have a lot of those knocking around in Austin Brighton.
Excellent question, and a goal that I am trying to meet, though the BPDA can tell me if we've met it. That's why we wanted the amendment language, because PDAs inevitably do change, or they'll come back for some sort of change. And when they come back, we wanted that analysis to include the PD or this standard. I could be wrong. If the BPDA could correct or add to what I just said. Is that Brian? or Sanal, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Bruin, for the really great question. Yes, we're definitely thinking about those. I mean, the fact that when PDAs come back for amendments, we want to be sure that the commitments made when the PDA is first approved is not watered down. So that's something that we definitely agree with, and we'll be working through this language to see how it impacts already approved PDAs. So thank you for that question. We've made that point as well amongst ourselves, and we want to make sure we're capturing or at least addressing it in a responsible way in this process.
Yeah, we have a few in the pipeline that would definitely be of concern for this neighborhood. Thank you.
Questions from the advocates, my colleagues? This is the minimum that we're talking about. So if you have suggestions or concerns, or if there are parts of the zoning code that you feel should also be impacted, that's fine. And I'm sure, I know a lot of folks will be writing with some suggested parts that need to be impacted. So I'm going to leave this conversation now, if that's okay with folks, because I think really the back and forth is going to be about the implementation documents. So I think I wanted to start with, oh, Councillor Flynn has joined us. Councillor Flynn. Hi, Councillor Flynn. We did very brief opening remarks and then just got to the working session. So I don't know if you had anything.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Thank you for your leadership on this important issue. I strongly support what the proposal that you're outlining. My goal, like yours, is to make sure that Boston is a welcoming city to all, especially for people in need, for our seniors, for our immigrant neighbors, and that's in low-income residents. That's what I hope to partner and work closely with you and the administration on. And there's a lot of major developments. I think Councilor Braden outlined it as well. There's a lot of major developments in and around my district. And I would certainly like to make sure that there's an opportunity and there is space in those developments for low-income residents, for seniors, for communities of color, and our immigrant neighbors. I'm thinking out loud of, you know, whether it's the South Boston waterfront or it's 776 Summer Street. I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to be successful. So I want to say thank you to Councilor Edwards for your important leadership on this issue.
So what we're going to do is, as I mentioned, there were two documents that already exist that the BPDA uses that are now going to be part of the zoning code. That's the smart utilities and the accessibility document. And I think in our conversation, the BPDA made very clear there's certain stakeholders who are not here right now, especially when it comes to the accessibility for folks with disabilities. They're not here at this table. And so I wanted to, you know, I think everything deserves a fresh set of eyes to look at that, but to manipulate or make commitments about changes we'll make to already existing documents informed by the community directly impacted by them is a commitment that we're not comfortable making right now. Did I characterize that correctly, Sanal? You're muted.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. So I will just simply say it should be part of our analysis and look. And I don't know if anyone has any particular, if you've heard of anything in particular, but I think the working document that most of us are excited to get into is the BPDA's displacement document. And I'm going to start there. The smart utilities one also has some stakeholders, mostly industry or in city folks and certain agencies within the city. But I'm glad that they're at the table, but I want to make sure that this document where I think most of the advocates are on the front lines of dealing with displacement, gentrification. I want your perspective on this. So we're going to turn now to the displacement assessment from the BPDA. Jesse, if you could share your screen. So now I don't know if you want to walk us through this or summarize it.
Sure. So just for the record, we didn't receive any of the documents ahead of time. I just asked Jesse for them via email. I just got them 2 minutes ago. So just want to be clear that we didn't get any of this set of documents ahead of time. But we've seen the displacement assessment, of course, and the smart utilities and disabilities checklists are existing. So I'm happy to walk through this. Colleagues Tim Davis and Lizzie are also on this call, who did a lot of the work on putting these together. So as we go through these, as there are questions, we're happy to defer to them. If folks have questions, would you like me to just go through this and then we can answer questions as we go along, or do you want to have people hold questions till the end? Whichever way you'd like to do it.
Sure, just want to address, apologize that you didn't get it. I thought I had sent it out to everyone. I thought we sent it out as a group from Christine to everybody, participants. Luckily, 3 of the 4 documents you guys already have. These are your documents.
Yeah.
So only one thing is new, and that's just a part pulled out from Counselor Bach's memo.
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify that as we start. Okay, so how would you like to go? I'm happy to just talk through this, and then we can do a brief outline, and then we can open it up to questions. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah, why don't we go section by section, pausing after the section to see if there's any questions.
Okay, great. So section 1 is really and I know Jesse, you're driving, so I'll let you drive as I'm talking. Section 1 is a project overview. It's really the baseline information about the project name, the address. One other thing I'd like to add is we want to make sure that we're standardizing what we're asking of all developers and all proponents. So this was a way to make sure we're getting the same information from all proponents. So project name, address, total number of phases or buildings in the project, the primary contact, the owner, proponent, who the attorney is, the marketing company, the BPDA project manager, the staff person at the BPDA who will be leading this through the Article 80 process, the BPDA planner, the purchase date of the project site, the planning area, what area does this belong in? We have a lot of planning areas happening in the city right now, planning initiatives. And if it belongs in one of those initiatives, what area is it in? And then what stage of development review process is the project in on the date this assessment is being filled out. So Councilor Breeden, this might address your comment earlier about projects coming back in after they're approved. We're looking at large project, expanded large project, response and notice of project change, and the resubmission prior to BRA board consideration. The building classification, what is the construction classification?
Oh, wait.
Go ahead.
I have some questions. Does anyone have some questions about that part or the information? So Councilor Janey has also joined us. Thank you, Councilor Janey.
This is Tim David.
Sorry. I'm sorry, Councilor Edwards. I just want you to know that I've also joined.
Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. My apologies. Councilor Janey and Councilor Mejia have joined us.
So this is Tim Davis from D&D. I just wanted to say one
second, Tim, before you go.
Yep.
I might check in with my colleagues first if they had anything to say. Apologies, but
That's fine.
To Councilor Janey and to Councilor Mejia, we're screen sharing the BPDA's document for a checklist to make this zoning amendment real, the implementation. So that's what we're looking at. If Jesse, if you could scroll up, so you're just basically dealing with section A. That's the overall section, and that is what we're looking at right now. And so anybody have any questions about that particular section? We're gonna have folks do that. I had one question, and that was specifically around the role of, would it be announced in this part of who the diversity inclusion officer is who's reviewing that, or someone on their staff, as to be guiding the community process. Is this where you put that in there? I noticed you put in other BPDA staff. Anybody?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
So I see in section A, you have the project manager, the planner.
Mhm.
Would you be putting in diversity and inclusion person as well, who's responsible or looking at this project? Or maybe when they started, when they received it at least?
Yeah, I think, I mean, are you talking about the diversity inclusion, the director that we, of the job that we have out right now?
Yeah.
So, let's have that person start, and then we can, this is a first step at this. And as soon as that person starts, we can start filling in the details, but this is meant to be a baseline. And we can certainly start, we can certainly add things to this, but we haven't had that new person start yet.
Okay. Yeah. I'll just put in the reason why I think it's important is if they're going to be responsible at assessing who's at the table, the community process and inclusion, language access, I really would like to see that they're named in the process as part of it.
Yep.
Okay. Anyone else on section A? Tim, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
Counselor
That's fine.
Counselor Davis. Tim Davis, and then Counselor Flynn has raised his hand as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one clarification on the last part of that when it asked what stage of development that this form is being filled out. That's really to signal that this form may be filled out more than once during the development review process. It's intended that the developer would submit this at the initial stages of review, but as the review process continues and either certain commitments are made or certain clarifications are made, or the project may change during the review process, that they resubmit this document later in the process as well, so that it's clear kind of where we started from and where we went to.
Very well. I see Counselor Mejia also raised her hand. Counselor Flynn?
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Edwards. I wanted to follow up basically on your question, Councilor Edwards, relating to the diversity team, but on a similar note, would we want to include in this section, or is it in another section, the finance team, the banking team, where you get the money for a particular project, and whether or not that banking institute is a good neighbor of the community and is working closely with the city and with the impacted communities on making sure that banking in cities are also included.
Thank you. Very briefly, I believe that is included in their initial filing to the BPDA. They have to disclose their LLC ownership structure. I could be wrong, so I'll turn it over to the BPDA to answer that. I also see Counselor Braden has raised her hand.
Yeah, so we do ask the LLCs are part of when we get the LOIs, the LLC and the proponent is part of that. It's coming from the proponent team, which includes the LLC. But I hear what you're saying, Councilor Flynn, on the financing and the banks. So I hear that comment.
Is it something that we could put in here?
Let's take a note here, and I'll take it back to the team. And I don't want to make a commitment today, but I definitely can take that back to the team and to see how we can make sure we're getting that information in the right way. Because the financing, we've heard that financing partners can also change as the project evolves. So I want to be responsible as to how we ask that question, so we're getting the right information at the right time.
That's fair, and I also think it's very important that we have that information in terms of their good neighbor. So maybe it's not here, maybe it's another checklist or something. Counselor Mejia.
Hi, yes. Thank you. Sorry that I was late to the party, but I'm here now. I just have a quick question, Counselor Edwards, and you might be able to tell me who could best answer it and whether or not even it fits here. But in the project overview, I'm just curious as to whether or not there is a space to identify how many projects this particular developer has already in progress in communities of color. I think that it's worth just kind of gauging kind of what their portfolio, if you will, looks like. So I'm just wondering if there's any way for us to be able to identify that. And if we can name the, the locations, or just probably the zip codes, if some sort of data that we can assess. And then I'm also curious if this stage here, is it possible to note what role community has played in terms of informing this project? Is this like the first, like, I don't know what stage this is in because I came in late. So the project overview, that's just, has there been any communication with the community at this point or not? I don't know.
Yes. They're assessing the project on its face, and it looks as per what Counselor, I'm gonna call you Counselor one more time, Tim. What Tim had mentioned is that this document is meant to be used and reused and used again, so they can come back and add to it as well. But again, I'll turn it over to Sonal or Tim or someone else in terms of the assessment and where community process would be noted elsewhere.
This is Tim Davis. There are questions we haven't gotten to in form that do discuss, ask the developer to tell us more about what they are going to do around the FFH. I think that there could be a possibility of including in that question or in that series of questions, a question that says, how did they come to that conclusion? What kind of community input did they use?
Yeah, that would be helpful, Tim. Counselor Davis, thank you for that. And then in regards to, is it possible to also, it would just be helpful, I'm going to assume this is going to be public information, but to have a sense of just the developer's portfolio, like how many projects are already in production in certain neighborhoods, kind of like, how can we keep track of that? Is there a way for us to see this somewhere, maybe not in this project overview, but maybe somewhere else, so that we can kind of at a glance see who these individuals are and kind of how they continue to roll?
I think that's a great addition to also the assessment of themselves. It's later on in the document, Councilor Mejia, but I do think that makes sense.
Yeah.
And
No,
okay.
Thank you. I think that does make sense as well. I'm not sure if it belongs in this assessment per se, but I appreciate what you were saying, Councilor Mejia, about the developer portfolio.
Yeah.
I think that we're getting, folks who are kind of responsible developers and have done good work, and so we're not we definitely hear that comment. Yeah, on the developer portfolio point.
And then I'm just curious if there's a way in the project overview for us to gauge the intentionality around supporting small businesses, minority and women owned. Is there a way for us to, in the project overview, note that level of effort?
Not at this level. There is, and throughout the document, we're screen sharing it, but when we get to the actual breakdown of yes, no, have you done certain things, those questions, every single one of them, we should include.
Okay, great. And so that's it for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Braden?
Quick, just a quick question in terms of the, Tim mentioned that this overview, this review can be triggered at different stages. Is it possible for the community stakeholders to ask for a review again? If you don't if they assume that there's maybe an issue, that can community stakeholders ask for an overview, a project overview again, to trigger another review as things go forward?
So I don't know that there's any other review that the BPDA can just by request do for the environment, for traffic and things like that. So I don't know that that is a precedent that we have already. I could be wrong. That's the only reason, mostly
Does
because it
Tim
costs a lot of
mention-
money and time. Go ahead.
Tim mentioned that this wouldn't be a one-off, that a project could have this done multiple times. So I just wondered what would trigger a repeat of the analysis, so to speak.
It's usually the developer wanting to change the project or coming back to do anything to amend it, which
Okay.
triggers, you know, the analysis for several things, not just this,
Yeah.
for them to make sure if they come back that their traffic is still flowing the way they promised it would, that their parking is still at the ratio they said, that the environmental impact is still the same. And so we want this also in that list as well, but it's usually developer triggered.
If a change in their PDA or whatever. Okay, that's fine. That's grand.
So now,
I was just going to add, you know, we've got several stages of Article 80 development. So you've got the, you know, the LOI, you've got the PNF, and then you've got, as you know, they get scoped. So this will be part of the scoping session, the scoping determination, and then they file, you know, responses to the comment, responses to the comments received on the scoping determination. So this will be part of that filing. So Article 80 has, you know, specific sections in the specific deliverables are based on what they're filing per the Article 80 process, the LOI, the PNF, the scoping determination, the supplemental documentation, the DPIR, and so this will be part of that filing. So I think it, you know, we also don't want to make this completely burdensome, and want to make this to the, you know, where it's valuable to both the community and meaningful for the community as well. So we're tying this to the Article 80 process and the filing that we get through the Article 80 process.
unless there's any other questions from the community, we're going to go on to Part B. And I guess we can do B, C, and D, or B and C at least. So now,
Yeah, so I mean, I don't want to read it out, but I think it's on everyone's screens. But we're looking to ask, you know, the building classification description, the construction classification, is this new construction, site area, and then kind of what, under what part of Article 80 the project is subject to review under. So is it under 80B or under 80C, which is large project and PDA? And then also if the project is located within a landmark district or a conservation district. So we wanted to get that information as well as part of this assessment.
would this be a place to put in the question about that Councilor Mejia had about concentrations of, I don't know, poverty, concentrations of people of color, concentrations of, because she had asked where the project is going to go. Is it going into a traditionally, you know, Asian community? Is it going, would this be an appropriate question, place?
Yeah. Well, why don't we scroll down, because I think we have the analysis that
I see it. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe, you know, I think if we go through the form, we might be able to answer some of the questions. But having these questions asked now is actually really helpful, because we can start identifying where in the assessment we've actually started thinking about those things or address those things.
1 second, Councilor Mejia. Could you please come back up, Jesse? I just want to make sure that we're good on B and C. And Councilor Mejia, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. I'm just curious in this section here, going in line with the same question that I asked earlier in the project overview, because what I'm really trying to gauge is kind of trends that we're seeing from specific developers. So to kind of follow the thread of Councilor Edwards in regards to kind of like that data capturing in terms of socioeconomic status, race. I'm also curious to know if there's any way for us to identify, like right now, I'll just give you an example. In the Seaport, there's not much happening when it comes to building for in a more equitable and fair way. So I'm just curious if there's any way for us to kind of look at neighborhoods that have been overly saturated with a quote unquote low income development. If there's a way for us to kind of like see some trends. I don't know.
That does come later in the form.
Oh, okay.
It
Thank you.
does. No, it's fine. So if we can, unless anyone has any questions about B and C, we're going to go into, scroll down, Jesse, to addressing displacement and project site. Counselor Sanal. Sanal.
Wow, I'm joining Tim in this situation.
Yeah.
That's great, thank you. All right, so addressing displacement. So this is displacement at the project site. We want to be sure that we're looking at commercial development here as well, which I thank you for mentioning that at the beginning of the session. So we're looking at previous and current uses at the project site and property. And Tim, please feel free to jump in any of this if I misspeak, or if there's any more information you want to give on any of these comments. But really, getting a good kind of baseline information about what what has been previous and current uses on this site, what was there and what is there on this site. So have there been any buildings on this site at any time over the last 2 years? Any buildings on the site currently? And then very importantly, if yes, are they currently vacant? Are they, are buildings vacant or not? The current uses on the site. So not just the property itself, but also the site. And the narrative that talks about what uses have been on the site or buildings at any time in the last 2 years, including temporary uses. That we thought that was important to include as well. Any tenants currently inhabiting any buildings on the project site? If yes, we'd like to have more information, and you'll see that we actually ask for more detailed information as we scroll down. If there are tenants, have they been informed of any changes in ownership? If yes,
Jesse.
Yeah, I'm looking at a different, I'm looking at my computer, so because it's very difficult to read the small writing there, so I have a different scroll here. And then this is the details that we're asking for residential tenants, total number of units, what is the current vacancy rate, are there any, this is really important, current or expiring affordability restrictions or special property tax agreements. So, if we're looking at buildings or projects that have affordability restrictions, and if they're expiring, how do we look at those, and how do we make sure that we're addressing any expiring affordability restrictions? The Office of Housing Stability is a really, really good resource. Have the tenants been informed of this resource? And then, questions about each unit. So for units that have been vacant for less than 2 years, provide some information, and we can go into this, but we wanted to include the number of children. This is kind of family units. So are we displacing, is this project displacing families? I think that's a really important one that we wanted to capture. Household income, residents who are not proficient in English, and if there are any relocation of financial assistance that have been provided or will be provided to tenants to assure housing stability. And then similar questions on commercial space, the number of commercial spaces, the square footage, the tenancy, etc., on commercial spaces, and then any notifications sent to tenants related to the proposed redevelopment of the property. So I'll stop there because I think that's a lot of information I just kind of shared. And wanted to get questions from folks.
I'll start off with why 2 years in terms of looking back on the project. What was the reason for just 2 years?
Yeah. Tim, I'll let you answer that first, and then I can hop in.
I think that the challenge for us is knowing exactly how far we can look back. I mean, there's not a easy answer to that. We thought that 1 year was certainly too soon. 2 years seemed, typical. Usually if someone is clearing out a property, they're not going to sit on it for 2 years before they then submit it for development review. So we felt like 2 years would capture any of those. We are looking for information on that last 2 years, even if the current owner did not own it for that 2 years. So if they bought the property from someone, they'll have to submit to the best of their knowledge who was living in the property even before they bought the property. We know that's difficult. It may take work on the BPDA may have to do some work to maybe try to identify if there had been tenants there. to kind of flush out if there were people who might be eligible for some kind of assistance who had already left the property.
Okay, I understand. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but okay, fine. I just, the reason why I'm also bringing that up is, you know, our condo ordinance is 5 years look back. I think it is.
The condo ordinance is, well, yeah, we can look at that.
I'm not like
and I wouldn't say
stuck
the
on
condo
this. I
ordinance
was
isn't
just,
I'm sorry, Counselor. I wouldn't say the 5 years is a look back. It's a look forward.
it's
for
not
the tenant.
actually, I'm sorry, it's prospective, as Sheila corrected me.
Yeah.
So my fault. I thought we were being inconsistent with our current look back. The other question I have is specifically around you ask about, are they currently vacant? And I'm assuming you mean therefore the building is completely, I think it's, I don't know. I think there should be some wiggle room for some people who are under eviction orders. I think that should be in there. You should be asking if anyone's under an eviction order. Do you plan on filing an eviction order in order to do or to have your building put through? And also asking if anyone has been recently evicted in the last 2 years, at least, from that building. I think that really speaks to displacement. So they can't, you know, they want to always clear out the building, right? And purchase it and then say no one's here. Well, I think this is a great place to catch if someone was there. So I think we should have eviction as part of this checklist.
I think it's a good addition.
Yep.
I see Councillor Flynn has his hand up. He'll go next. I promise, Councillor Flynn, I will see you. The other question about the tenants currently inhabiting any buildings on the project site. This may be me being too technical, but there are a lot of people who inhabit buildings who are not officially tenants, right? So I still want that to be part of the analysis. I mean, whether they have a legal right to stay there or not, they could be squatting, they could be in the middle of fighting about their tenancy. So I just think narrowing it down to tenants versus is anybody occupying the building expands that for the analysis purposes. There's also, whenever we ask about, throughout it says tenants, but I think it should be occupants. But when we ask anytime whether a person has been informed of something, that seems very passive. So I would ask the language change to have you informed or have your company or has the developer done this? Because I don't know if that's really allowing, if I'm asked if Tim was informed about something, I could say, I don't know, or I think so, or so on and so forth. This, I hope, is pushing them to do something. So have you done this? Might be more of a directed push. And then have you done this in a language that they speak also is something I think is important. I see the other hand raised, Councillor Nadine Cohn, and I will get to you. And then there's so I'll stop there with my suggestions. So those are my thoughts. Didn't know if there was any pushback, concerns, or if you were good with some of them. And I can turn over to Councillor Ed Flynn and then Attorney Nadine Cohn.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Edwards. I know Tim mentioned it briefly, and there's a section in here that highlights it, but I would like to get a little bit more information on, has that building in the past received any type of tax assistance, tax credit, tax break, whether it's from the city, state, or federal government, and what impact would that have on the current ownership? I would like to get a little bit more information from the BPDA on that section about tax breaks.
Tim or anybody?
I think that'll have to be Sanal, but I think that's the reference to the question where it asks about, are there any special property tax agreements on section 8, 121A, 121B? It's asking for that information that would tell us that this project may have some special requirements. And we do this at BPDA. When I was a BPDA, when we had a project that had an agreement like this on it, it was already, we would take into account that as part of the review process anyway. This just really puts it on paper and gives us a way to flag it very quickly in the process.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to figure out if there's a tax break that was given to a previous owner of the building and now it's being sold, what impact does that tax break, tax assistant, tax credit currently have on new ownership on a new building? What impact does that have?
And trying to
on whether it's deed restricted.
Yeah,
it depends on how much it flows with the property. Councilor Flynn, I'm thinking like 121As, maybe you're thinking about that, right? With certain parts or long-term tax relief given for the developer to do something, and sometimes they don't do it.
Right.
Is that what you're thinking about?
Yep.
Okay. Or the mercantile 13As and things like that. Again, I think what runs with the land is what I'm hearing you ask about. How do we know it runs with the land and there's commitments that this person has bought that they need to fulfill? Am I correct, Councilor Flynn?
Yeah, that's correct, Councilor Edwards.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. So I think this question is meant to for the developer to tell us what they understand that the project already has agreements on, so that we can include that in the process in terms of figuring out what the project can or can't do given those agreements. It's incumbent upon the BPDA to kind of make sure that they have that ground covered anyway, because those agreements could then obviously change what the project can be.
Yeah, Tim, I guess I'm just thinking if maybe 10 years ago, if there was a company that received a major tax break to come to the city, and they received that tax break, and now they may want to sell that building. So they got the land for a song, and now they're selling it for a profit. Do you envision that happening?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, Councilor Flynn, which is it's a tax break to a developer, or it's the who, and then it's the where. So I think and correct me if I'm wrong, you're trying to understand kind of if the tax break was given to a developer, a particular proponent who is now no longer part of the project, what happened to that tax break? Is that what you're trying to understand?
Yeah, that's part of it, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. It's something that we also definitely look at, and this is our way. The reason that this was added here, a big reason for that, is to capture that. As Tim mentioned, it is part of our kind of review, and this was a way to memorialize it. I'm going to put a pin on that because I think it's an important point, Councillor. I don't have an answer for you today, but I think it's an important point. So I'll put a pin on that.
You're right. Yeah, thank you. I just don't want someone trying to be cute and trying to manipulate the system. I want to make sure if there are tax breaks given in the past, that they should be on record. That as we sell a building or transfer a building.
Yep. Thank you.
That's important.
Yep.
Councilor Flynn. Nadine.
Thank you so much, Councillor Edwards, for allowing me to ask a question. And I'm sorry if this is somewhere else in the document and I'm missing it, but wouldn't we also want to know the racial and ethnic composition of the units, and as well as the neighborhood? And I'm not sure I see those questions anywhere in this particular document. And if I'm missing it, please show me where it is. But I think that would be important to know.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone wants to respond to that. I will note Hajar has raised her hand, and then Counselor Mejia has raised her hand. This document deal with demographic.
Oh. So don't want me to answer that one. The question about the neighborhood will come later. The question about the specific tenants, we can certainly add something asking the race and ethnicity. I think the only thing is obviously the question would be whether the landlord is making that assertion of what the race and ethnicity of the tenant or the occupant is, or whether or not the tenant themselves is making that statement. But yes, we could probably include that.
Hajar?
Hi, yes, thank you for allowing me to ask a question, Counselor Edwards. I wanted to follow
Having a
up.
hard time hearing you.
Okay. Why don't you
Yeah.
get back to me, because I have to turn off my fan in order to, you're hearing noise. My fan
It's
is
better now. It's better now.
It's better? Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to follow up on a question that Counselor Flynn asked. He's with regard to what follows the land, what follows in terms of the tax breaks, et cetera, on the land, and tie that back to making sure we're tracking what happens with tenants and with units when a project is being considered. I wanted to see if we could see if the developer asked for the previous owner to make stipulations before the sale that would impact tenants.
So it's, yeah, basically asking if they asked that building be delivered vacant, right?
Exactly. Or with higher rents.
Higher rents. Did you, I'm asking for clarification with your question. Were you also interested in the developer asking the tenants what their plans were if they have to go?
I think that would be helpful, but I think that that should be also connected with the city's.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? The assistance, the residential assistance. I don't remember
Yeah.
what's right in here, but the developer tracking that wouldn't be useful by itself.
Any other questions?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Mejia.
Yes. And I'm just curious, and I'm not sure if this is in this section or even legal to ask, but and I'm sure Councilor Edwards will let me know about myself, but I'm just curious as to whether or not we can ask the racial diversity of the developer's company. Is that information we could ask without, violating any laws? But I would, if it's not anywhere, I'd like to know it, if it's possible to get a sense of the makeup of the developer's studio, or whatever that you want to call it, their office.
So I want to, so Councilor Mejia, thank you for the question. I also want to go back to the question previously asked about asking about race and ethnicity in this assessment. I don't want to commit to that right now before making sure that we can legally ask that question. So I just want to just caution before making that commitment today that we need to make sure that we can legally ask that question about race and ethnicity in this assessment. So number one, that, and number two, Councilor Mejia, to answer the question about the makeup of the developer team, we do get pretty detailed information about the development team, and kind of, and a lot of times we do, the developers will submit to us, this is our makeup of our development team when it comes to women and gender, et cetera. But again, I want to be very careful about making commitments about asking about race and ethnicity before, to make sure we've gotten input from from the legal minds. And I'm not a lawyer, so I want to be sure that we've done this through our legal team. So we're asking questions that we legally permitted to ask. But the intent, I totally understand. Yeah.
And that's fair. That's really fair. I do appreciate that. The only thing that I would like to just kind of like add and just kind of a word of caution is that I've been in enough of these development meetings, whether it be as a member of a civic association or just a busybody or just a city councilor, and all these spaces that I've been in, what I have seen is that a lot of developers come and they usually have a partner that is a person of color, but that person's voice and real authority is just really there more for just like a checks and balances. So I think while I appreciate the whole notion of not being able to really identify and all that, I just think that there needs to be something that we can do to ensure that people are not just doing things to just check off the box, but that the people of color that are participating in these processes and in these projects really do have a formal voice and not something that is just transactional. And I don't know how we assess that in this type of environment, or if this is even something that we could address within this intake form, but I just really do want to ensure that these things are not transactional and that there is some real accountability about who is at the table and what these developers are committing to and what their background is, I guess.
No, thank you.
I would say there's a similar process with cannabis, where we do ask about their ownership structure. We do have assigned points, and we actually just basically grade who they are, where they're from, the impact of the war on drugs on them. We do ask if they're a person of color. We list the different ethnic groups. So the city does that. I don't know how it is done. I don't think we do it yet in zoning, but I did want to say we have a similar process for other benefits or other assessments of projects, or at least cannabis entities to come into the city. So I think it's worth exploring and figuring out how to do it. Councilor Mejia. Hajar has a question, has her hand raised.
Yeah, just for clarification, it's the Office of Housing Stability. And I think reporting, if the building was supposed to be delivered vacant, if tenants have new restrictions, if there are new guidelines for tenancy, like if there were tenants at will, or they had leases, that kind of stuff should be shared and open to the public before sale. And also within this process, because that's not this process, that would be in the excise court, in the courthouse, but making that information available to within this process when you're tracking, and within the Article 80 process, when you're tracking how the building's sold and what's happening between the previous owner and that relationship is really important for also tracking when tenants get displaced. And so, yes, it was the Office of Housing Stability. That's all I wanted to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and thank you for that comment. I think, again, we want to be very careful about confidentiality as well when it comes to tenants. So I hear the sentiment very loud and clear, but we want to do as much as we possibly can in this assessment. But we also want to be clear, we want to be sure that we are asking questions that we can legally ask, and also respect people's confidentiality. And if tenants don't want to get information, they don't. So making it a requirement is great, but it's also it takes two to tango as well. So we want to make sure that we're asking questions that we can get answers to in the right way and in the right time in the process.
Absolutely, and it should be anonymous and aggregate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just so we can continue on with conversation. Again, folks, we're going to have ideas about residential, this component, I'm sure, well into after this this working session. But Sanal, if you wanted to move into commercial.
Sure. Thank you. All right. So commercial, The number of commercial spaces and/or tenants in any buildings on the project site. What has been the vacancy? How much occupied, how much vacant, what the square footage is, the most recent leaseholder name, the type of business, the name of business. Is it a nonprofit organization? The tenure of the tenancy, I won't read all of this because it's on your screen. But we've kind of captured a list of things that we want to make sure that we're getting from developers when it comes to the commercial space on a project site. And then if there has been any relocation of financial assistance that has been provided or will be provided to assure stability, we want to also make sure we're getting that information from the proponents.
Thank you. Before I turn it over to Councillor Sabi George, who has raised her hand, I did want to know if you would be able to, would you note if it's the one or the only kind of business in an area? I'm particularly talking about like grocery stores. Okay. If it's the only one in East Boston, if it's the only bodega, if it's the only laundromat, which I've seen, happen, if that's what's going to be displaced, I think it's worth noting how many other options the community has. And to really push for, especially in the only ones, what kind of relocation assistance within the community, within the sub community too. It's one, East Boston's big. So if someone's displaced from Jeffrey's Point as the only laundromat and you put it in Orient Heights, that's not helpful. So just if we can have that kind of a like relocation analysis within like how far away have you relocated it? So
no, I get it. I think it brings into the question then becomes kind of the the radius. What is the radius of relocation or radius of analysis? So that's a good, especially for grocery stores and bodegas, which may, if there's only one soul, that does make a significant impact on the community. So totally get that. Yeah.
Then also in terms of if a developer is providing commercial space, how many small businesses are they providing it to? Are they providing long-term leases? One of the top displacement issues we found is that many small businesses don't have long-term leases. They're on month to month, and they have absolutely none of the protections that a lot of tenants do. So just curious about the leasing structure they're going to provide for small businesses, maybe asking about that.
Yeah. So this is where I think the issue of private development versus city-owned property comes into play as well. And not that. So I just want to, a lot of times, having done this kind of work for many years now, I think what we hear from private development is it's very difficult to get tenancies in certain locations, and that might be the reason that the leases, the term of the leases might be the reason for that, for sure. But I think the amount of subsidy provided to a small business is easier for publicly owned land, and maybe not as easy for privately owned land. So I hear what you're saying, Councillor Edwards, very loud and clear. But I think we've also seen that even when developers have wanted to put in small local businesses in their developments, they've had some difficulty putting those in. So I just want to caution that as being, as a goal. As a goal like this, it's yes, absolutely. But want to be careful about what the results are and kind of be realistic about how we can make sure that we're achieving those goals on private development. Where the city really doesn't have as much leverage as we do with public property. So I totally hear what you're saying. I just want to make
the leverage. Yeah, no, I agree. But the leverage, I guess the one set of leverage we do have on private property is our zoning. Yeah. So that's why this is.
No, I totally hear that. It's just I'm thinking about the kind of the enforcement and reporting. So if we've said that this must be small businesses on this much of a site and it doesn't happen due to a variety of reasons, I think we need to kind of put a pin on that to say this is what are the reasons for which this may or may not have happened. So yeah. I'm just cautioning that based on many years of experience doing this, that even with the best of intentions, sometimes it doesn't work out.
Counselor Asabi George, then Counselor Flynn.
Thank you,
And again,
Madam
anyone
Chair.
else
I wonder,
has a question, please raise your hands. Sorry, Counselor.
that's okay. So on the commercial space tenant detail, should we also be asking, just so it's also aligned with the residential tenants? But I do think there's an opportunity to ask about the number of employees and potentially like type of employee. So whether it's a full-time salaried employee versus an hourly worker, whether or not we can ask about wage rates, because it's, you know, to me, it's important to know what types, you know, how when a type of business is moved or put out of business or closed or whatever because of a development, what is the loss to jobs in particular. So I don't know how much detail we want to go into, and I appreciate that a lot of the focus is around the residential piece and the impact on the resident, but the business, you know, we know locally owned businesses do typically pay higher wages and play a different role in a particular community.
Oh, that's a really good point. Thank you for that. That's a good suggestion.
And probably whether or not they're part of a franchise or independently owned and all of that.
Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. And just wanted to follow up maybe on Councillor Asabi George's point. I have a lot of small businesses in the downtown area, in the Chinatown area. They're owned by women. They're owned by immigrants. Many of them are immigrants. You know, as the city was booming prior to COVID-19, many of them were afraid that they were going to be displaced, and eventually that seems likely. You know, about the last thing I want to see in my district is moving a successful small business that's doing well, that's employing a handful of people. It's women owned, and it's immigrant owned. What are we doing for that small business to stay in that location? We're able to make these, you know, we're able to have these major deals with these fancy banks, and we're able to make the funding work. But are we able to make the funding work for an immigrant-owned small business that maybe they cut hair, or maybe they sell oranges, or maybe they sell fish? If we can make a project work, $1 billion project work for these, to build a huge building, can we take another look at making sure that we're able to keep a small business in this city that's women-owned and immigrant-owned?
I think, Councillor Flynn, that's an absolute priority and needs to be something that is part of our analysis, especially in the Economic Development, Office of Economic Development, who is going to be at the seeds of keeping a lot of businesses open, as you know, with the liquor licensing and all the grants are coming from the Economic Development, right? The small grants. I don't know that makes sense for this particular checklist, unless I think actually the checklist does ask them how they're helping or if they're relocating a business in the neighborhood, but their financing and the ability to keep them open, I don't think that it belongs in this checklist, but we should definitely look at how this checklist works with economic development. Does that make sense, Councillor Flynn?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that, Councillor Edwards. I appreciate that.
No, these are great points. I mean, that they all do marry each other, but just on the checklist point. Councillor Braden?
I want to echo the concerns of my colleagues, Councillor Asabi George, Councillor Flynn. The small local businesses, many of them have a month-to-month, you know, leasing arrangement that it leaves them very vulnerable. And what we notice is that landlords who want to sell their building to a developer will evict or discontinue the leasing arrangement and then leave their building, their shop front vacant and then say that then the developer comes in and say it's a blighted area because you've got these vacant shop fronts, and that adds more weight to their argument to let's do something new and just demolish and build new. So I really feel that we need more protections for our small business community in this, and this might not be the forum, this might not be the instrument to do that, but it's certainly really important to pay attention to those pressures on small businesses. Thank you.
Well, I just to say yes, we agree. I think no one disagrees with you, Councillor Braden. I do think part of that analysis, though, is in the form. It does ask who was there before in the last 2 years. It does ask, what kind of business was there, and that does help us in terms of tracking and understanding how the person is moving in the city, what businesses or areas they're buying up. And I think that would be really important for us, because I can point to some developers in East Boston, they specifically buy up car garages or auto mechanic places on purpose to turn it into, housing and stuff. So I agree with you.
The same thing's happening. Yeah. And the other comment is really that the car garages and the auto repair, and very often those businesses are located in a district that is zoned like as light industry. And what we're seeing in Austin Brighton is that areas where light industry are being developed for residential purposes, and we are squeezing the space that's available for light industry, like your auto repair and your upholsterers and your small light industry. And I think it's a great concern, because it's pushing those small businesses. Many of them are immigrant owned or women owned, and it's basically saying there's no room in our neighborhood for you, go somewhere else. It's very concerning.
No, we all agree. I don't know that the checklist will at least be able to capture that data. I don't think it's going to drive how we can protect those businesses. I think it's going to have to marry with Office of Economic Development, though.
I just want to piggyback on that. Thank you, Councilor Edwards. I think it's important to be very disciplined as to kind of what this will do and what this cannot do, and where all the points that have been raised are extremely valid. But we want to be careful about kind of where's these issues. There are other offices that are really looking at these issues very carefully, and what belongs in the zoning code and what belongs as part of this process, and what questions we're asking that will inform the responsible development on the site. So we just want to be careful about kind of being kind of disciplined as to our thinking as to what we're asking here, and the results that we can expect from this process, and what is it very important that is addressed in is being addressed by other efforts across the city. So I just want to be kind of very cautious about that, because I don't want to be in a situation where we're over promising something and we're just not. This is limited to the zoning code and limited to kind of what we can do on a project site for private developers. And so there are limitations, but all the issues that have been raised are extremely valid. And the city is well equipped to deal with a lot of these issues in economic development, et cetera. So I just want to kind of echo what Councilor Edwards has said as well. So thank you.
So if there's no other suggestions for commercial section, let's go into now the analysis of the surrounding community, which I think we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but will also help us to, again, further and enrich this conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you. So, so this is something that we are excited about, which is a displacement risk analysis, which is a kind of a heat mapping tool or mapping tool that we're in the process of developing. It has not been, we have a lot of academic research nationwide that speaks to displacement, and Councilor Bach has been extremely helpful in identifying the academic experts, both locally and nationwide, that have been looking at this. So we can create a tool that is specific to Boston, that looks at displacement risk analysis, and has a list of criteria that we can use to say, this is a kind of a higher displacement risk area. And so we're working on that. Want to put a pin on that. It's an asterisk tool we developed. So that's something that we've got our research folks and some really, really smart academic folks working on. So we'll have more on that later, is the headline there, but want to just kind of highlight that piece. And then we're also, I won't read this out. I'm not a very good reader, but it's what are the measures that will be taken to avoid displacement of existing residents in the surrounding neighborhood. So we really want to give the proponents of private developments the opportunity to answer this question in a way that allows for lack of a better word, kind of creative thinking about this. I think we've seen the developer community, runs the gamut of really, really good developers who really want to do a really good, really from the bottom of their heart want to do a good job and want to have the ability to have provide creative solutions to the impacts that they might have, and so we wanted to give the developers an opportunity to provide us a narrative addressing how they're assisting the current residents of the surrounding area to remain in the community in the future, to afford housing and find pathways to economic opportunity. So this is a place where we're looking to developers to provide information. Not that we do have a list of things that we'd like them to do, but this is a way that we can say, what else are you doing, and what are you doing first of all, and what else are you doing that we might not have thought of, and I'll stop there because then we'll get into the section 3.
My first thoughts were on the displacement mapping tool. If this is I remember looking at a tool when I was at OHS that was kind of like a heat map, and it was really awesome to see, but what it was a map really, cool. Blue was cool, like less likely to happen, and then it got, the redder the zone, the more likely people were to be displaced, or I think it was evicted. But part of the concerns about that was how the data, like in order to inform the mapping to be really up to date, the eviction data, for example, was a year or two behind. So I just one of the things in terms of the mapping that's going to be developed, the research and the research behind it, how are you, or could you make sure that it's as up to date as possible for displacement purposes, or how are we going to make sure of that? Because there's, eviction records are hard to get and hard to sample together to analyze a whole year, and it's usually a year or two after the fact. So that's one thing. And then with will this mapping tool, or either this, I see you, Councilor Bach, will this mapping tool for displacement analysis, or for I think there might be a historic analysis or exclusion one later, but either one, will they be done in time for us to approve this zoning amendment?
So I'm hoping so. I don't know. So the answer to that is because there is so much academic research, and I think everyone on this call can attest to that. Everyone's seen a study on displacement. There have been some cities that have done some of this work. We're looking at LA, Seattle, New York. It's not a science. It's not a hard and fast science. This is complicated, and so we've got some really smart people working on this, hoping that this can get done as we, the goal is to get this done parallel to this process. So that is the goal, but let's not let a timeline be the enemy of a good quality product. So this is the goal that we're working with, and we're hoping to have something that we can respond to or look at, whenever the experts in this field feel like we can have something we can look at that's specific to Boston. And that's an important point as well, because what works in LA or Seattle may not be, pertinent to Boston. So this will take time, but I think it'll be time well spent. And I hear you on the updated information. So we're also cognizant of that.
And one thing we're trying to, one thing we're trying to balance on the data is data that is fairly easily and publicly available, as well as the timing issues. And even the census data that we commonly use for a lot of these kinds of analysis have some lag time that we would certainly love to have it to be more accurate to today, but we have to kind of do what we can get from the Census Bureau.
Councilor Bach.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on this. I mean, I think this tool is really important. My office has also done a bunch of research just into kind of the options that are out there. I think the mapping displacement paper that came out recently from a bunch of MIT folks was very helpful in that it threw up a bunch of the options that are being used by other cities and then said, what does it look like if you apply these to Boston? And I really just want to stress Sonal's point about connecting it to Boston. I think this needs to be a recursive process where, you know, the research team at BPDA and D&D puts together something that's based on the existing options that are out there. And like Tim said, sort of publicly available data, because in my mind, we really don't want a situation where we're asking any developers to come in with proprietary data sets that like nobody can scrutinize and understand. But you have that tool and then we test it, right? We see what does this tell us? And then actually, you know, Justin Steele and the paper authors at MIT use the phrase ground truthing, right? Where you take that map and you look at it and we have a conversation with advocates and neighbors and folks of like, how does this reflect what we sort of see on the ground? And then to the extent that it doesn't, what is it that you would need to change about the analysis? Because you don't just say, oh, this place is an exception. You say, well, what is the factor that's making this place actually seem very vulnerable to displacement, but not show up in this data? And that's the way of kind of reflexively checking it back. So I think that's going to be a really important part of this process. And so my instinct is it will make sense for, like, I certainly hope that we can have a draft of something this summer just to put it out on the table and do some of that like ground truthing, because I don't think that perfecting will happen all in one swoop. And I also think I wanted to reflect on the fact, I think I and a number of advocates on this call and you had a conversation, and I think this is also why the point about lag and imperfections in data and such is also why it's important that we're providing these tools to help create a context for what developers are going to do to affirmatively further fair housing with their project, and kind of takes into consideration the displacement risk and the historical exclusion dynamics of the place that they're building in, but that doesn't create kind of like zones. And that's why we changed that language, right, from zones to index. Doesn't create like zones where people have to do something, and then like zones of the city where you're off the hook in terms of doing anything to affirmatively further fair housing, because we don't want there to be that kind of sharp divide based on what might be a data artifact. And so I think that's why it's good to have two indices. It's good to have them be something, this will be my last point, but something that's publicly available, like basically that you can go before you even buy a piece of property and put in its address and kind of see what the displacement risk and historical exclusion dynamics for that neck of the woods is vis-a-vis the like city of Boston, because I think that also lifts some of the mystery. We sometimes have an issue in the city around like when people buy land, sort of what are their expectations about what zoning authorization they're going to get and what they're going to be asked to do. And I think the more with moving fair housing into zoning, we're setting really clear expectations across the board about the kinds of contributions we're going to look for people to make to this like overall civic goal. The more sort of like consistent and clear we are about that, the better. And to me, that's a good reason to have these tools be something that's publicly accessible once we've got them developed. So those are just some thoughts on all of that. I know that the city folks aren't ready yet to sort of road test something, but I do hope that that's something we can do with the kind of larger community of advocates and counselors and everyone before we settle on anything for sure. So thank you.
So if we want to go, unless anyone, I think the narrative is important, that they are going to volunteer particular information. And that they're forced to think about it and think out loud in a public way about what they're going to do to affirmatively further fair housing. They're going to be given information about the neighborhood that they chose to buy in, with the heat indexing maps, right, are showing the displacement and the historical exclusion. And I think that's a great tool set to say, you've been given this data, you bought here, this is what has been done here in terms of injury and exclusion. What are you going to do to prevent it? I think that's a very important question. So I do think that that's important, especially with the context of the data that they will be given.
Can I just add one thing?
Counselor Sheila, Counselor Dillon.
There you go. So I think this is existing residents of the surrounding neighborhood. So it's the neighborhood that sort of surrounds the development. And, I don't think I focused on it before, but I think we're not saying as clearly maybe as we could. We also want to avoid displacement of the existing residents or commercial businesses of the site that's being developed. We ask a question about financial assistance or temporary or permanent relocation, but we don't necessarily, I heard this from, I think, Councillor Flynn. We don't really zero in with a question about avoiding displacement of the existing residents of the subject development. So I think we just need to, as we go back and look at some of the changes, we may want to make that a little bit more clear. Thanks.
What are you doing to prevent the current residents' displacement? Just
That's
outright
right.
asking.
It's not, I think, for me, that's kind of oftentimes the most important, thing that we're looking at. And I don't see it clearly spelled out here. I think it's just, we need to just change the wording some. Thanks.
Okay. Just looking at the time, Councillor Braden, but if we're going to move on to section 3 right after you ask your question. Councillor Braden.
I also think that we might need to consider trends that if there's already been displacement, like my instinct about Alston is that we've already had a huge amount of displacement. I'd love to see some capacity to address to reverse a trend that has already happened in this process. And it may be wishful thinking on my part, but I'd like to just throw that into the mix.
On the on section 3, I don't know, Councillor Bach, did you want to discuss the list of ideas you had? This was on a separate document. I pulled it out. At this point, this is allowing for developers to kind of, the list of document ideas that you had for developers to think about, section 8 vouchers, things like that, as part of their, how they're going to deal with displacement, or did you want, do you think it's better we just go on to IDP?
Whatever. I mean, I'm happy to take the direction of the chair. I can talk about this briefly if you like.
Yeah, I actually we sent out the document too early, but it should be fairly noted the amount of work Councilor Block did in basically saying we don't want people to just analyze a problem. That the goal of this is to say, yep, things are not so good, and then move on with their lives. The goal is to move them towards what they can do. And so Councilor Bach in the document that's called AFH Developer Mitigation Ideas had several for developers, and these could be part of a yes and no. This could guide them on all the amazing things they're doing. And Councilor Bach, you're pulling it up right now, right?
Yeah, Jesse's got it up on the screen, and I'm just on my.
In that document, I think it's worth, if you'll scroll down, Jesse, looking at all of these different ideas that Councilor Bach had. I see Michelle Brooks has her hand up from the Sierra Club. Michelle, is it about this document, or did you have a previous question?
Yeah, no, thank you. I was just wondering, I know these are in draft form, most of them, but are they publicly available to access yet, or can we only see them?
We can email them to you. We did email them out. We can email them all to you. They're all drafts.
Okay, that would be great. Should I send my email to you, Lydia?
You can do that, or Christine from or ccc.go@boston.gov. That's the committee's email.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry, Councilor Bach. Again, this is her great work of just trying to guide also yes and no's, what you have and haven't done, to help make them make decisions as well. And it's a great way of asking them and suggesting at the same time. Councilor Bach?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just say a little bit about, I mean, basically, in the part of the document we were about to get to, the BPDA document, there's then that parallel question about historical exclusion. And so, as Councilor Edwards said, you have sort of these two pieces of information that the city is helping people understand about the context where they're building. And then there's all the information that they're putting into this assessment, both in terms of the direct displacement impacts, potential impacts to avoid, like Sheila said, and then kind of broader neighborhood issues. And so one of the things I was thinking about is it's very important to me that where this assessment ultimately takes us is in the direction of like real proactive ways that developers can affirmatively further fair housing through their projects. And I'll just say editorially that I think it's really important to frame this in terms of like we have a collective civic goal and also actually like federal legal requirement to affirmatively further fair housing. And because we're making zoning decisions in these, like in our Article 80 processes, we like that goal and need is implicated. And so we ask all projects to do their part. I think in a lot of ways, the most helpful parallel is thinking about the environmental standards we hold our buildings to and the ways in which we ask everybody to do things with their buildings in the sort of direction of green building. And that's not just about mitigating a harm, right? There are things where we might say, oh, you better recharge your groundwater because you're going to pull some water out of the ground or something, right? There are things where we're making really direct mitigation asks. But I think also we just recognize that as a city, we're trying to reach these climate goals and we need everybody building a new building to do their part. And similarly, we live in a segregated city with a like deep history of exclusion and displacement. And as we've been discussing so much in the media the last few weeks, discrimination against protected classes in our housing stock. And so it's like asking everybody to do their part, right? And so I think that when you think about it in that framework, what you ideally want to do is be providing a whole kind of set of potential interventions that projects can make to help them do their part. And I think a bracketed question, which will probably be one we all discuss in a different working session, is kind of, what's the internal structure in the BPDA to measure what seems appropriate for different scopes of projects? Do we want to set a different degree of expectation for PDAs versus large projects versus small projects? Is there are we asking people to look at slightly different interventions depending on how much those indices suggest they're in an area of historic exclusion versus an area of displacement risk? But bracketing those questions about sort of scope and scale, I put some kind of suggestions about the types of things that feel like they would move the needle towards fair housing citywide, recognizing that really we have trouble keeping folks in protected classes in every part of our city right now, kind of regardless of where those indices suggest you're sitting. So I'll run really quickly through the list here, just because I know that not everyone has the doc in their inbox, but so, matching or exceeding the percentage of family size units in the surrounding neighborhood. So thinking again about what kinds of families are we building for, knowing that family is a protected class that often gets discriminated against, providing a larger proportion of accessible units, thinking about how we encourage our rental voucher holders. So could we guarantee some kind of first lease up preference for some proportion of units for an initial year to rental voucher holders? We have to be a little careful here because there might be positive source of income discrimination issues. So sort of thinking about how to frame that in a way that works, but something that kind of reverses the trend of voucher holders being the last people to be considered. Just things like allowing last month's rent and security deposit to be paid in installments for some percent of units for folks who don't have a big chunk of cash up top, guaranteeing preferences for some percent of units to families that are currently rent burdened or have experienced a no-fault eviction or have experienced eviction, but now display ability to pay, right? So something that kind of puts those people again towards the front of the line. I think, and this maybe connects to the subsequent section of the BPDA's document, but asking our developers what voluntary sort of deepenings or additions to the IDP policy requirements they might consider. So maybe you sort of voluntarily are extending your affordability term or making a higher number of units affordable or deepening the affordability of units or making a higher proportion of them a larger unit size than your unit mix would require. I mean, I point out these are adjustments that individual developers do make sometimes already as kind of part of the like mitigation package conversation, cooperation agreement conversation with BPDA. What we're doing here is calling out these as things that really have a fair housing implication in terms of the population that you're serving with our inclusionary development policy units, especially when you think about deepening affordability or changing unit size. And so we're sort of listing those as potential ways that, again, somebody could kind of make that important affirmatively furthering fair housing contribution. I come from a background of thinking a lot about the housing authority. You know, somebody may be agreeing to host new project-based vouchers or RAD units on site, help get some of those built. There might be cases where we actually encourage a project to increase density, but by adding affordable units. In the case of homeownership units, maybe, you know, these are our IDP homeownership units, thinking about, or they're not IDP ones, they're just there. And we think about, is there a way to give preference to first generation home buyers, which has been shown to be a really good way. So that's, again, a bit of a distinction from first time home buyers. First generation home buyers is a really good way of thinking about closing the racial wealth gap. And then kind of, you know, this, I think, this one I think was added by Councillor Edwards' office, but sort of thinking about, is there a connection here that we could make or facilitate making for people to the AOP Acquisition Opportunity Program to help create permanent affordable housing in the immediate neighborhood, even if it's not on the site. So that's just like some examples of things. And I'm sure it's a list that we could add a lot more to.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know if that's about enough from me. Thanks, Councillor Edwards.
No, it was excellent. I just want to acknowledge that this is the amount of work and why this is so important, because we hope that they're as creative as we'd like them to be in terms of their excitement to affirmatively further for housing. This is talking about developers, but we also need to just give them suggestions, outright suggestions for how they can do it. And the reason why I added the AOP was because a lot of my constituents and yours and Councillor Flynn's are folks who cannot qualify due to status for any of the aid that we're talking about, Section 8 vouchers and things like that. So we want to make sure that there's still an opportunity for them to help prevent displacement, regardless of your immigration status and regardless of and what they can do. And that is, you know, there's a whole building of folks who have mixed status families, maybe buying that and working. We're doing it already with Suffolk Downs, and I thought that was a good example. You know, Sheila and, you know, all of us are already working on how to get the developer to contribute a huge lump sum to help local nonprofits buy up the buildings and keep them permanently affordable. That is preventing displacement outright, and for the deed restrictions and making sure it happens forever. So that's just another opportunity for them to contribute to prevent current displacement of folks in their buildings as they are. So that's why that was added. But this is Councillor Turner, Margaret Turner. Your hand is noted. I will when I finish. This list is not exhaustive. This is where we turn to you guys who are on the front line as to whether, you know, these are tools in the toolbox we're going to give to developers to say, when they go to how they're preventing displacement, to say, we are going to do, or we have committed to the following, and put it in there. And that's what I think. This is not a checklist. This is not a point list either. It's not, you have to do these certain things. This is just guiding their perspective. Margaret? Margaret?
Oh, thank you. Sorry to unmute, but I just want to just also emphasize there are some of these things that the city should be affirmatively doing as part of its duty to affirmatively further fair housing. And like one of those things is that they really, when developers, you know, get an approval to build something and you know, get all the constellation of approvals that they get, and the IDP, the obligation to create inclusionary development units goes along with that. And that really should be in perpetuity, just as the way it is with 40B. If you know, built units are built pursuant to 40B, they're in perpetuity, and that is anyway something to be developed as we get the home rule petition, et cetera, for inclusionary development. But there's, in any event, some of these things should be not a negotiation with the developer, but you know, the city should be looking at requiring as a quid pro quo for getting the approval.
Thank you. Councillor Braden?
Just on the back of that, the IDP in Alston Brighton, the inclusionary development has been 13%, and the AMI has been pegged at 70% of the area median income, which has been a great impediment to us to getting more affordability in the huge amount of housing that's been built in Alston Brighton. So I would like a range of AMIs included in the IDP, and that should go across the board, not just I think it will diversify the number of folks who actually qualify for these affordable units.
Thank you, Councilor Brayden. So again, these are all amendable drafts. We're just putting it out there for folks to respond to. Just to, I understand we're getting close to 2 hours at 2 o'clock. I'm committed, and I hope some people are committed to continue to at least finish this form, this form checklist. But with that, I respect if you cannot stay on after 2 o'clock. I will continue to then just go through the form with whoever can stay. Councilor Tim, you have raised your hand.
Right, I just wanted to address Margaret Turner's question earlier about perpetuity. We have been, in my former role at BPDA, we were starting to look at doing perpetuity. At the moment, that would require the state to approve that for each and every project. And they have clearly stated that they would not approve us doing perpetuity on projects where we were including the neighborhood diversity preservation preference.
Really?
So it is an ongoing discussion, but it is the desire that we would have perpetuity on projects.
Disappointing from the state. Thank you for that, Tim. Thank you for letting us know. So moving on to promoting an inclusive community. So we've looked at the individual project, we've looked at the residential, we've looked at the commercial, we looked at the surrounding area. Now, how do we push for a more inclusive community? This is what this part of the checklist is pushing for. So I'll, Sanal, if you're, Sanal?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, sorry, for some reason on my phone. If you would walk us through this part.
Sure. So you know, we've spoken a little bit, and Councilor Bach has alluded to this, the analysis of historical exclusion. So we start with that, and that tool, you know, again, pin on that to be developed still. And then we go into the IDP questions. You know, does IDP apply to this project? What zone are you in? Are you creating compact units? What's your tenure type? You know, are you doing on-site, off-site? And then I think what's really exciting and interesting about this, and Councilor Breeden, this is to your point, is a few things. One, how many 3-bedrooms are we providing? This goes to families. Are we providing units for families here? We're really trying to get folks to not just give us studios and 1-beds for IDP units, but are we also, you know, providing units for families so they can also be part of the community. Accessibility is a big part of our conversation, as you all know, and then the AMI breakdown. So it goes from, you know, 30 to 30% up for rental and 60% up for home ownership. And then, you know, and then it goes into the offsites, looking at the square footage of units. And so Tim can speak to that in a little bit more detail about square footage of units as opposed to number of units. And then do we anticipate making a payment to the IDP fund? So, you know, a lot of kind of very conscious look at what we're getting out of the IDP and making sure that we're addressing families and we're addressing AMI ranges as well. And then like we saw above, an effort, you know, a chance for developers to provide a narrative as to how they're fostering an inclusive and welcoming community and what efforts they're taking to ensure that the project or projects are promoting, you know, inclusive, integrated, welcoming community. So making sure that they also take into account the analysis of historic exclusion in their answer. And so that's, you know, we're offering a chance for developers to provide a narrative to answer those questions as well. And then this is, I know Tim has a hard stop at 2, so I want to just jump to this before we lose Tim. But this is the marketing and tenant selection portion of the assessment. And, you know, that goes to, and as we all know, marketing is a big, huge part of this. And, you know, who the units actually go to. So it does not end, this does not end at board approval or zoning commission approval for projects. This goes way past approval and into construction of the building. So making sure that the developers are committed to an AHA and committed to a marketing plan and acknowledgement upfront to, you know, that they'll be a committee abiding by the marketing and tenant selection. So, you know, and it goes into working with BPDA. We're working with BPDA and OFHE. And then that's kind of where we end. But like I said, I don't want to lose, I know we're losing Tim in a couple of minutes, or actually a minute ago. So thank you for saying Tim, but I wanted to make sure we get Tim to kind of respond, Tim to be here to respond to any questions that come up on marketing and tenant selection as well.
Yeah, and I wanted to just say, in terms of the marketing, it specifically asks developers to say what they're going to do. That is very proactive in terms of reaching out to neighborhood residents, members of protected classes. Also asking them what they're going to do with their non-restricted units in terms of marketing. Because we obviously have a bigger role to play as a city in detailing what the marketing efforts are for income restricted units. But we also want to see what the developer is going to do on their market rate units to make sure that that is a more welcoming and inclusive community of market rate tenants who may be protected classes. And also in terms of their tenant selection policies, just in general, because for the income restricted units, they're supposed to apply the same tenant selection policies on their income restricted units as they do on their market rate units. We want to clarify that and also see what kind of policies they're using, because that would be an opportunity for us to suggest that they look at their tenant selection policies differently in terms of things like credit history, CORI information, etc., so that all tenants are treated fairly in the process.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. I do see you. I just had a quick question before I go turn it over to you. Just wanted to note that. I particularly like on this form the AMI breakdown that you have, so that people can actually see what kinds of affordable units they're actually offering. You know, I think that's very important. If they're offering only, you know, of the 10 units that they're doing, they only offer one that's at 30% and the rest are at 70%. I think that's really important for folks to see up front, and for them to be, you know, to acknowledge that. I also want, I think, what would be ideal is if that same kind of data analysis for the percentage per the unit and also the home ownership units, if that is put for the surrounding neighborhood. I thought that was incredibly informative when we were discussing Suffolk Downs, for example, in our many meetings, to be able to see what the, you know, what the percentage were, because what we found with some advocates is they you know, as you saw, the community, for a lot of them, looked at a certain percentage of AMI, right? And they wanted that replicated in Suffolk Downs. And so I think it's really important for folks to see that as well. So around the development, what are we looking at in terms of people at 30%, 40%, 50%, 60 and 70% around the development or the project site? Why is that important? Because if your project site percentages for affordable units don't match the community or are extremely skewed away from the community, then you could be, whether you mean to or not, you could be to the exclusion of a lot of people. So I think it's great for the family unit size. I think it's important to have surrounding area AMIs is also put down as part of your, in the form or checklist or something in there, so they can see that. Maybe that'll be in your heat indexing maps, I'm not sure, but it should certainly be very clear up front. You're buying in a historic exclusion, you're buying in a place that has displacement, and you're buying in a place that's 90% people who are at 30% AMI. Knowing all that, what are you going to do to affirmatively further fair housing? So that's just one suggestion I have for the form. Apologize. Councilor Mejia.
Wow, that's why you're in this role. I don't got nothing else I have to say after that, Lydia. That was good. I just want to, this is in regards specifically to marketing. I'm just always really curious about not just so much the translation and interpretation situation, but I think it's really, for me, it's also the use of being mindful of folks who may be unable to read and write, and what use of you're thinking of, like maybe audio and visuals for folks in terms of like getting your message out there. and being really super mindful that not everybody knows how to read or write in their own native language. So I'm just curious about what we're thinking about in terms of that situation for marketing. Or is that, I don't know if that fits within here, but I'm just curious.
So now, would this be something also the new diversity inclusion person might be also helping with?
So I want to be, again, these are all really important points. I just want to be very careful about setting like expectations for what can be achieved here, what goes in this document, and what goes elsewhere. So those, Councilor Mejia, important points, that's a vital document. Is there a marketing plan, a vital document? Absolutely. And we want to be sure that, that documents are accessible to all, regardless of language or ability. And does this belong as part of the zoning code review? I don't know, but does it belong as part of the review in general? Yes. So I just want to kind of, in my mind, I'm starting to categorize things and be very disciplined about what goes where, because I think if we need to be very disciplined about what is in this document so that we can achieve the goals that we've laid out for ourselves here, which is affirmatively furthering fair housing through zoning, and then the language access plan. Marketing belongs in D&D. So Tim, I know had to go, but I cannot commit to something that will be a part of a marketing plan that's part of D&D. So language access plans are extremely important, and we're making sure that we have them as part of our Article 8 review processes and planning processes. But when it comes to marketing of vital documents that belong in other agencies, I would defer to those. But I hear what you're saying as making sure that vital documents are accessible to all.
Yeah. No. So then I'm curious, even within your department, when you're thinking about the developers, just kind of what are some of the best practices that they're going to employ in terms of their communication? I think that fits there too, in terms of their own responsibility. So I would just encourage the developers to really think with a lot of intention about all learners and all, and the marketing plan needs to be inclusive of all needs. And so just want to push a little bit for that.
Yeah, well, Councilor Mejia, I'm a child of parents who barely speak English, so I understand that very, very well. So this is personal to me as well. So I totally understand the point. I'm trying to be very careful and intentional and being very disciplined about kind of what belongs where from as far as this assessment is concerned. But also, yes, the BPDA definitely is actively involved and working on a language access plan that is inclusive, of all. So I'm just trying to be disciplined about kind of what belongs where. But the point you're making is extremely important and extremely valuable. So
thank you.
Sorry, I was going to answer a little bit to your question, but I do want to acknowledge Councilor Braden raised her hand, and then Hajar is next in terms of questions. There is still conversations to be had, Councilor Mejia, about just because it doesn't belong here, that it still belongs part of our goal to affirmatively further fair housing. And so there's zoning amendment specific things that we're going to do, and then there's Councilor Bach and Ayers already talking about that. Folks from GBLS have been talking about it as well, and they include the following. One, are we going to look at a citywide or a person specifically, an auditor, who is going to be looking at all agencies in the entire city for how it is obligated. They all are part of affirmatively further fairing housing. It is not just the burden of the housing department or BPDA, right? It's a federal mandate for us to push towards equity. So that's one. Two, that's an auditor component. That's a question still outstanding. The other one is an interagency, and I'll let Councilor Bach, if she wants to describe that, an interagency kind of assessment of the plans and the mitigation and looking at how we're going forward. This could include many people at the table who are looking at this and saying yes, no, so on and so forth. Number three, one of the other issues that have been brought to us, and I am firmly very committed to figuring this out, and that is when specifically we're talking about the personalized mitigation on site, when the IAG is, leveraging their power, right? Because what the IAG is, folks that we nominate from the community to negotiate with the developer. One thing that would just drive me nuts as if after all this equity and all these promises from the developer and IAG that does not reflect the age, the diversity, or the income, or even the rental or house ownership status of our communities, turn around and mitigate and negotiate for things that undo the equity that we just got from the developer. And so those are questions that have come up, and these are comments that have come up in our conversation with the BPDA amongst ourselves. Not all of them will belong here. There's certainly room for you, myself, Councillor Bach, to talk about how we're going to get an executive order or ordinance that gets some of that stuff done, though. Fair? Because we on it.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you.
So again, but as Sanal said, some stuff is just going to be, some things are going to be in here, the zoning amendment, and some aren't. I don't know, Councillor Bach, is it okay if I go to Hajar and Councillor Braden first? Okay. Councillor Braden actually had a question, and then Hajar had a question.
It's more of a comment, and I'm speaking always about our little situation here in Alton Brighton. We have a huge impact of institutions in our neighbourhood. Like, so when we go to a new developer has been proposed, very often we make it explicitly state that this housing will not be rented to students, because what we're finding is that a lot of our 3 bedrooms units are being that aren't, that a lot of our 3-bedroom home units are being occupied by students, and that leaves absolutely no room for families. So when new development comes along, we are very explicit in demanding that, in the agreement, we ask them not to rent to students, and some of them balk at that, but usually if they want to build the building, they agree. And students aren't a protected class, so I think it's legal, but that's what we have to do out here.
Thank you. Councillor Hajar. Everyone's a councillor today. Congratulations. Hajar.
Thank you. With none of the work. I just wanted to thank everybody for what you're putting in, the BPA for listening, the commitment to implementation that has sticks. I have to step off, and I'm looking forward to seeing more. Thank you for the write-up for suggestions in terms of voluntary things that the BPA that the developers could do. I am looking for some more teeth with regard to affordable housing and affordability and income related guidelines around protected classes that are neighborhood based. And I know that will come. I appreciate everybody's time and commitment to this. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Michelle Brooks, you've raised your hand.
Oh, yes, thank you. Councillor Edwards, I was just wondering, could you say again what the role of the auditor would be? It's actually the genius idea from GBLS. So I would kick it over to Margaret Turner.
Actually, the idea is that BPDA, and we were specifically thinking about it as an outside fair housing consultant that would do like a comprehensive sort of soup to nuts review of Boston's zoning, because it is so complicated. There's so many different components. There's the IAG process. There's communicating with the community. There's approvals. There are all of these things, and they're done different ways in different cities. And it would, for the city of Boston to really affirmatively further fair housing, there's a need to step back and get an independent fair housing consultant to really review everything that we're currently doing and how things could be done differently. I just wanted to say, I in preparing for this, I went back and looked at like the 2014 and 2015 audits that were on a different topic, but those were very comprehensive audits of BPDA that said nothing about fair housing at all. And in fact, there were, recommendations made that you could see as sort of conflicting with the goal of fair housing and equity and inclusion. So, to us, it feels very important, in addition to this zoning amendment, to get that additional point of view from an outside consultant. Fair housing is a really, specific area of expertise, and there are places that would be good to be able to do something like that. And it's given that the zoning code currently doesn't have anything about fair housing in it, and we're very thrilled that Councillor Edwards and other city councilors are working on this, but that there should be this comprehensive review that's like similar to what happened in 2014 and 2015. Not saying that anybody's done anything wrong at all, but just, you know, there's a need to bring in that outside expertise to do a really thorough review.
Thank you. And again, it's the fact that the city has committed to affirmatively furthering fair housing since 2017 with the task force. And part of the task force recommendations of the many was this zoning code, but it's not the only thing. And so sometimes the conversation you're having, and specifically a lot of the great comments from Councillor Mejia, is about the bigger picture beyond this amendment. And so you have the full commitment from the council to look at that comprehensive report and look at all of the recommendations. We're just dealing with one right now. That's all. Councillor, actually, if it's okay, did anyone want to or have suggestions about this IDP section though? It's Councillor Bach actually had some suggestions about density bonuses possibly being put in and the percentages. But this is still an assessment tool we're looking at. When they go to say I'm doing affordable units, we've all been underwhelmed, right? As Councillor Braden noted, in many cases underwhelmed by what they're proud of this 13% at 70% AMI. So I think this is very comprehensive. Kudos to you, Sanal, and those who went through and made sure it wasn't enough to just walk away from that. They're going to just basically show what they're doing. Councillor Bach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to very quickly say, I agree. I think it's great to have this kind of degree of specificity around the IDP policy. I think, and I want to flag, because somebody said earlier, you know, while it's nice, some of these things that we might ask a developer to do voluntarily in terms of deepening affordability or increasing the count, you know, we'd like to just require that. And I tend to agree. I think that obviously there's a process for amending our IDP policy, and there's various sets of legal constraints, and there's a home rule petition up at the State House right now, which we all need to sort of put our shoulders to the wheel to get passed. And so to me, this is like, it needs to be a both and, right? That we're both having that conversation about how to make our IDP policy as strong as possible. And I'm really grateful to Councillor Edwards and the many folks who have been working on this before I took office. And then there's also this question of how do we nudge people also voluntarily to take on further pieces beyond wherever our requirements currently sit. So to me, it's meant to be complementary in that way, not sort of saying, oh, we should settle for voluntariness, but just that sometimes that's where we are. The other thing, just to flag what Councillor Edwards said, is, you know, I do think, and this is probably more something to put a pin in for the, you know, next time we have a working session or whatever, but, you know, part of the whole idea of having fair housing and zoning is that these are public processes, are processes of having something go through the BPDA board that have a tendency to create value, right? Often privatized value, and that therefore, you know, that can be a mechanism when we're doing that of trying to create sort of accompanying things in the public interest. And I think that PDAs apologies for that, are opportunities of they tend to be places where we, the public, particularly create value, frankly, through upzoning of some kind. And it seems to me that when we're talking about this affirmatively furthering fair housing process, both for small projects and large projects, and then also PDAs, that we might want to be having a conversation about whether we should be setting sort of firmer additional requirements in view of fair housing for our PDAs. And that's like a future conversation, right? But okay, if this is getting upzoned for residential, does that come along with some additional affordability requirement? I think that's the type of thing we should be talking about. I also think there may be, to the point about just mandatory stuff in general, you know, And again, it interacts with the IDP policy and what, you know, and what we can and can't approve, but it might make sense in our areas of historical exclusion where over time we've repeatedly, you know, excluded protected classes and done a lot of it by income, that we say, hey, if you are in an area of a sufficient degree of historical exclusion, like you got to do your IDP units on site, because that's the only way we're actually going to shift this map. So I want to flag, and it's towards the end of the session, but I just want to flag that I think, to Hajar's point about teeth, that there are some minimum expectations we may want to set related to affirmatively furthering fair housing that are commensurate with the additional zoning relief and potential for value capture that we're creating as a public. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Box. There's the moving from the IDP to the final section, I guess. There's some acknowledgement or additional efforts section, Sinal, or am I skipping anything?
I think I covered those.
Oh, you did. You did. I apologize.
I covered those, and I wanted to be sure and cover those, you know, while DND was on the call.
Right.
So I did cover those.
You did. I apologize.
No, that's
so,
okay.
It's 2:20 right now, and so I just want to let folks know, first say thank you so much for all of you who came on and stayed on the entire time. This is all a matter of draft and input, and it's, you know, think about any other convention, if you will, about setting up a historical kind of standard for the city to be zoned by. So it's going to take this kind of time, and I want to thank you for commitment. In my finite time being here, being able to introduce this zoning, but the rest of you have been doing this sometimes your entire career. So there's some OGs on here who have been doing this. I'm looking, you had to laugh, Robert. I knew you would know what OG meant too. So I was, you know, to Bob Terrell, Margaret, Nadine, the folks who have been in the fight, Michael Kane. I say thank you, Kathy as well, Kathy Brown. And I don't mean to exclude anybody if I've forgotten. I think Dwayne was on here earlier as well. And these folks have been doing work without recognition and fighting for this in many cycles of gentrification and many cycles of displacement for neighborhoods that we've never even seen. And I want to thank you for that. So it's really on your shoulders and on your effort that we're standing today to push us even further towards equity and make this city a beacon really for equity. And we'll be the first in the country that does it this way. So with that being said, the zoning amendment, we're going to continue to have another working session. Now that you have the documents that we're working off of, right, and the kind of consensus language, the next working sessions, very likely, one will be dedicated to language, where folks should be coming back with this needs to be changed. This doesn't make sense in terms of what we're saying in the minimums for the zoning amendment. Okay, so that's the document that you should be looking at. It's the amendment update document. And then in terms of the actual implementation documents, I don't know how far along BPDA will be for the historic or the displacement, you know, kind of area mapping, but we do need to, on this particular document we're working on, there are a lot of suggestions. And so we want to give them the time to implement those suggestions, or the suggestions I think that they legally can put in, and so that we can have another draft to look at publicly. There's two documents, as I mentioned, the smart utilities and the accessibility. Those will require stakeholders to be at the table if we are planning to change them at all. So what I recommend for everybody who's interested in this is to look through those documents, and if there is a change that you have to suggest, please notify us, because at this point, I'm less inclined to change those documents, having been the folks in the disability community and disability commission poured their hearts into creating that accessibility document. So unless you see there's an equity component that's not there, I'm inclined to just keep it as part of the list, but I'm not inclined to lead on that unless somebody tells this committee there's an issue. And even if they do, we're going to bring the commission to the table to make sure that they are part of helping to design that. So I see, you know, working sessions on language and working sessions on final implementation documents. But I'm beyond excited. I mean, I just want to say also thank you to the BPDA, because we knew that if we came in here not an agreement or not with a consensus, this conversation wouldn't be as efficient. So we went out of our way to sit and talk and go through this to make sure we had a consensus, is what I would call it, about where we're going. So thank you, Sanal. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, John. Thank you. What is it, Lizzie too? Because I know Lizzie did a lot of work on the displacement documents. And if I'm missing somebody, I apologize. It's without Sheila Dillon, who left a little early as well. And just to let you know, I mean, one of the greatest things about this process has been the expertise of my now new colleague, Councillor Bach. We're all sweet and pretty in public, but we go back and forth, and that's a good thing. She challenges me. I hope I challenge her, because we are so passionately dedicated to this. And so I want to thank you, Kenzie, publicly, for the back and forth and for the continued push beyond the zoning amendment. I think that's what you have been really saying. It's the baseline and then beyond, and how it gets implemented in real ways. So with that, unless anyone has any conclusory remarks, I'm going to end this working session. You will get the next working session's dates, documents well in advance. My apologies, Sanal. And we will be able to have these conversations and continue. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, everyone.
Well done. Thank you.